Yo, what up? Welcome to Free Refills Podcast, where we come together as youth leaders to discuss the realities of leading in youth ministry. Our hope is that you leave refilled, refueled, and re-energized to carry on in ministry. I'm your host, Boss, coming to you from Indianapolis, Indiana, and I'm joined by my co-host, Maggie.
Hey, y'all.
Coming to you from Howell, Michigan. Each episode, we have a special guest join us, and today we have Jeremy Chen. Jeremy, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Jeremy, to kick us off, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you located? Tell us about your family and how long you've been in ministry.
Sure. Jeremy Chen here. I am located here in Philadelphia, specifically in North Philly, which, if you know anything about Philly, that means something. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay,
and
cool.
in the Kensington neighborhood. My wife and I, my wife has lived here in Kensington for longer than I have, but I kind of came here to, this inner city urban context by way of Princeton, New Jersey, where I used to do ministry. So I've kind of had an interesting mix of sort of more campus ministry in a pretty privileged context. And now I'm doing ministry in so I would just call it kind of community-based, neighborhood-based ministry. Sometimes I like, what does that word ministry even mean?
Right, exactly.
Serving Jesus, connecting with young people, youth, young adults, and neighbors in our community context here in North Philadelphia. So I started in ministry, I guess, in right after college. So 2011. So it's been 10 years.
Awesome.
But with a little bit of a mix of the kinds of experience. My family, just me and my wife right now.
Cool.
Open to having kids, but we've had, I would say in some ways, extended family. We've had, we like to see our home as a place of hospitality. So we've had some people, particularly young moms, living with us in our house here.
Nice.
But we'll see how the things develop in that area.
Sure. Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. A couple more questions for you. Because we're Free Refills Podcast, we like to ask this question. So what is your favorite or your go-to soft drink? And that doesn't mean carbonated beverage. That means non-hard.
Yeah.
drinks.
Well, I have to say my wife practices dentistry, and so she is very, she's read all these things about the big sugar industry and all these things.
Yeah.
You can look at those things up, but so we actually try to stay away from sugary drinks. I guess I have come to enjoy those sparkling water. What do you call those?
Yeah.
The flavored.
Like LaCroix?
Yeah, like those kind of things. I used to think
LaCroix,
they're disgusting, but
Do you have a favorite one of those? Because I know there feels like I'm not in that, but I have friends that are in that sphere, and they're like, Spindrift is better than all, and they have allegiances.
I like the blackberry flavor.
Okay.
I can say honestly, I feel a little hoity-toity when I drink it sometimes, but yeah, I don't know. I drink water a lot, tea.
Yeah.
I drink a lot of tea actually.
What?
Used to be a coffee person, but
Okay.
But now it's tea. So
All right. I'm surprised your wife is kind of given the blessing to say, yeah, you can do that, but being in dentistry. Okay, so what book are you currently reading or have just finished?
yeah, well, I have to say I'm an avid reader. I mean, I see it as a part of Jesus says to love Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind. So I'm actually reading a bunch at once, but I'll say one that's relevant to this conversation. I'm reading The Making of Asian America, which is fascinating. Just this history is really fascinating, by Erica Lee, I believe. Another one, we just finished this last night. It's called The Empire of Pain, which it's relevant to our neighborhood, which has been hit hard by the opioid crisis, but it just kind of chronicles the story of a family that you think about big pharma and all these things, just the challenges that have been created out of a lot of opioid drugs and
Wow.
the challenges we face in our country,
Yeah.
really around the world now. But sorry, it brings it to a downer. But
No,
there's
it's great. It's great.
Some other books I'm also, I love reading theology books and trying to better understand the Bible too. So I'm reading some of that stuff as well. So
Yeah, that's awesome. I am intrigued by the different books that people read and our guests that we bring in, because we'll drop them in the show notes. I'll look them up. I'll go find them and probably lean into them as well to build my bookcases as the stack of books on my desk that I'm reading. So thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Maggie, you've got some setup stuff as well to get us into the conversation.
Yeah, well, I will say thanks for sharing those books too, Jeremy, because I'm always looking to add to my reading list personally. Okay, so the month of May is, as you know, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, or AAPI is probably what I'm going to refer to it from now on so that we don't get tongue-tied. But our time together all month at NNYM, we're going to be focusing on conversations about AAPI experiences to raise awareness so that we can better serve our students, not only AAPI students, but I think this conversation helps all students regardless of their background, so that we can help serve their adult leaders and people in our communities well. And I personally am a biracial Chinese American woman, and so this conversation is important to me. I know it's important to you, but specifically, Jeremy, we wanted to bring you on since you have experience really passionately serving your community. I don't have experience as a youth worker, and as this conversation pertains to youth ministry and serving youth, we just wanted to get your perspective on it. But first, would you mind giving people some background on your AAPI history and background?
Yeah, that's a good. Okay, so I grew up in a mostly white area in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which is known for the Amish. And I always envied when I would visit my cousins out in LA area, like Orange County. And there's like certain pockets of the United States that have just like Asian Americans.
Okay.
And and LA area is one of those. And it's an area where you can actually have, within Asian American identity, you can have there's different ways of being Asian American. Like that's whoa. Whereas where I grew up is just kind of like I'm one of the couple Asian Americans. Where people just assume that means you're Chinese or whatever. And I am Chinese. My family's actually from Taiwan. My grandparents are from China. My parents are from Taiwan. There's some complexity surrounding the Taiwan-Chinese conversation, which is in politics right now. If you're paying attention to any of that, some Chinese aggression, or even those words are loaded because it depends on how you look at things politically.
Sure.
I was envious of the ability to have a sense of identity, right? Growing up in Lancaster and mostly white context. My parents had a very strong Christian identity. So we actually went to a Chinese church. We actually went to a white church and then a Chinese church on every Sunday. You would
interesting.
It is a big mega church, and the Chinese church borrowed a small chapel in the same building. So we would go to all these things. And then we also, another part of it is that we would go to these bigger Chinese Christian conferences in different places in the United States every once in a while, like once a year or something like that. And that was a bigger part of building my Asian American Christian identity. And there, you'd have the speaker talk about silly things about what it means to be Asian American, your parents and how the whole tiger parent phenomenon and how they parent you and how they parent you compared to your white peers, and those things would resonate, and that kind of built up in my identity a little bit. But I would find those gatherings refreshing. We went to China when I was in third grade, and we went several times actually, a couple times, and they were actually part of those trips would be to have sort of a mission, short-term missions kind of aspect to him, and that also gave me a little bit of a sense of heritage in terms of like thinking about Jesus, but also thinking about my cultural background, and just beginning to think about all the complexities of like East versus West, communism, capitalism, all these. It's just so complicated, right? And it's understandable why Asians are exoticized and seen as just other for all those reasons. But it's complex also being American, because I remember being on the plane coming back as a young person, and I remember back then in China at that point the sanitation was not as good. Just there weren't like widespread like toilets in the same way, and I just remember you had traveler's diarrhea, that kind of stuff. Sorry, I should have given it a warning for that, but
It's fine.
But I remember as a little kid coming back on the airplane and just being like ready, we're about to land, and I'm like, oh, God bless America, and having that perspective, that feeling, and obviously my view of these things have shifted and become more complex than that since then. But and then in college, I went to Princeton University, and there I did campus ministry in a mostly Asian Christian group, and that actually complexified my identity, because there I finally found a sense of Asian American identity. But because I was so used to being a minority, pretty quickly after having found that group, I immediately migrated to the edges of that group. Try to like, I don't want to say challenge, but in some ways reach out to them, to minority. Like I challenged the group to move beyond Asian American. I tended to be drawn towards the Latino folks that would, be the couple of people that connected, and also wanted to do like dialogue with other groups. And so after that, I in ministry, I've had opportunities to speak at different Chinese churches and Asian groups, but the Lord actually led me. I felt really comfortable there. I thought that I would do ministry there for a while. The Lord led me in a sort of drastic shift to come to North Philadelphia into a more Black and Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, whatever you want to say. And that whole conversation is complicated.
Right.
Led me into this context. So I'm not currently ministering in a predominantly Asian American context, but I still have a connection. And last thing I'll say is just a current effort that we've been working on is bringing solidarity between Black and Asian Christian leaders, ministry leaders, to talk, and for so many reasons, to get us to work on some of the challenges between our communities. And there are very real challenges. There are very real prejudices. There's very real, if you look at some of the recent anti-Asian hate, for complex reasons, a lot of it has been young Black men who've been kind of attacking or antagonizing some of these older Asian people. So and of course it really has been in the last couple of months that the Asian American identity has become a big thing that's popped up on the world scene, in our time. So it's been interesting to see this burden I have had for a long time. Really last 8 years or so since I moved to North Philadelphia, for this Asian and Black and just a broader racial conversation to come to the head. So
it sounds like I don't know if it felt this way when you were living it, but it sounds like as you were growing up, the Lord almost, he kind of gave you this ability to be surrounded by different types of people. So that is so interesting to me, because it was not my experience at all. My experience was, it was Asian or white growing up in the South. And our Asian community was the Chinese Benevolent Association, and they had all of their community things on Sundays. And because my parents were so integrated into Christian life, it was like my Christian life was white. And it never, Christianity and Chinese stuff never mingled for me. So that is so interesting to me that you had that, that I feel like that is such a gift.
Yeah. yeah, then there's a lot more to that, right? Because you think about contextually, if you never see Jesus, sort of, I'll use the word incarnated, right, or
Yeah.
enfleshed, or um, uh, a life of faith lived out within a cultural context, it is easy for people, like in the Black community, they often think about Christianity as like a white religion or whatever, or same thing, right? I mean, it's seen as a Western faith system, and the challenge of that is you end up, part of it is because some of it's been westernized, right? Or some of it is that you can't imagine living out that life of faith with more of a Eastern flavor, or Asian flavor, or more of a Asian American flavor. And so I just find it so important to open up the space for people to imagine how, as in uniqueness as Asian American, you have this certain way of following Jesus that
Mhm.
can be life-giving to others, and can open up space for other Asian Americans to imagine themselves following Jesus, or can also open up space for conversation beyond the East Asian community. So yeah, it's powerful to see your unique cultural expression as at the table of the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's important, I think, and I'm beginning more and more deeply to understand that identity. Whereas when I grew up, I think because I didn't have a strong sense of that, it was just kind of the dumb stereotypes things that, like, oh, you can use floss to blindfold Asians, like those jokes, the chopsticks things, the Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan stuff. But now, having coming back to embrace that East Asian Chinese identity, and not be ashamed of the fact that it is exotic to a lot of Western society, and recognizing it as a gift, right? It's a gift if I embrace it, to be able to help my peers who would otherwise be smaller, right? Whenever you're stuck in your own culture
Yeah.
in a way that pits your culture against others, you're a smaller human being. You don't have the capacity to see the beauty of things like collectivism in Asian culture, right? The more sort of a communal sensibilities, the honor shame, right? Even just kind of that style of way of thinking and feeling, and how it's in some ways easier to understand certain things in the scriptures and in the New Testament,
Yeah, for sure.
than for Western us here in the United States. We read the Bible so individualistically, and how actually learning from our Eastern counterparts, how that can actually give so I sense I have this sort of double consciousness, kind of borrowing from a lot of African Americans talk about that way, but like, yeah, what does it look like to be Western American, Asian, and then specifically Taiwanese, Chinese American? And then, yeah, you could say another consciousness I bring in is actually trying to stand in solidarity with Black and Latino people, and so it's a complex place to stand there.
Yeah.
But Jesus helps me figure it out over time,
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Jeremy, thank you for starting to unpack some of that and give us a little bit of a context of your world and your life and your experience. I mean, it's all complex, and I think that is what a lot of people, they're afraid of, that because of how complex and how much time it's going to take to dig into things and to sit with people and to start to understand and unpack and go, oh, and it's constant.
Yes.
And so it scares people, and they go, I just don't even want to deal with it. I want to pretend like it doesn't exist because that's easier. But that has terrible consequences down the line. All that being said, you've said some things that triggered some questions for me.
Yep.
Growing up in a predominantly white culture in Lancaster
Yeah.
as a teenager, and then you're going on Sunday, you're going to two different churches and potentially even two different worlds that exist in kind of the same building.
Yeah.
I mean, can you walk us through some of those things for yourself?
Yeah.
Maybe some, if you can reach back into that memory bank and go, here were some things that I realized at those moments and what it was like for me.
Yeah. Well, that Chinese church was conducted mostly in Chinese, and they would translate some things. I know a lot of, I can understand a lot of the Chinese Christian lingo, like holy, or like, the just the religious like vocabulary, I just think about, yeah, I would walk down from this American service, like either the youth group or the Sunday school or whatever. It's a big mega church complex. So it'd be like, huge auditorium
Yeah.
and sometimes I go to the service and then I come down and go to this side chapel, and there you see the Chinese people congregated in front of the chapel or whatever. And I would go in there and it's just a completely different group of people. Right. And watching, yeah, you're just entering a different way of being, right? In those two spaces. I mean, in the American space, it's just American, louder, just
Sure.
just you can start enumerating all the differences, and I wasn't conscious of it that much, but I wasn't processing it in this way. But in the Chinese space, I'll be there, and I know that it's not mainly geared towards me. It's mainly geared towards the first generation Chinese that are immigrants. And I mean, one distinction I can make is there's first generation, second generation, and this is kind of a common phenomenon for all immigrant populations. As a second generation, you're always caught in the middle. You're caught. First generation, you have the immigrant struggle and the whole idea of like trying to find a place within this broader society, and you have to kind of find your people, and that's why you have tend to have ethnic groups like the Chinese church, and that's a little bit different from the African American church. The reason they exist so long is because of the oppression, right? But
right.
a lot of the other ethnic groups, they exist in the beginning stages because of you need a cultural enclave, like a support system. But the second generation trying to navigate its identity, that's what it was, right? Trying to figure out. That's why we struggled with my faith identity. Like I would go to the Chinese or the American youth group, but I felt a little bit, my feeling somewhat out of place was not so much because of my ethnic identity. I knew that some people would look at, but I didn't mainly think of myself as what I looked like. Just mainly looked at it as just trying to fit in as a youth, cool, right? Cool culture, whatever.
Yeah.
Sure.
We're all with youth, so we understand that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then, but the Chinese part, I think I probably saw it as I know more than my broader American peers. I just know that I have a broader realm of experience. They just don't. I just saw them as not in a disdainful way, but just saw them as ignorant. They just don't understand this huger world that I've been put into. I mean, and so it's just really interesting to have experienced that. I will, can I go back and comment on something you said about like of narratives? I think one thing that happens with that is that when you're ignorant about something, there's sometimes Christians, we think that we have a shortcut because we're so used to using language like the God's grace is free, just believe. And like we just think everything's a shortcut to Jesus, and then you have these good feelings and bam, peace.
Right.
And I love these days. I like thinking about how Jesus walked with people, these 12 disciples for 3 years, and they still didn't get it.
Yes, I've been saying that lately. Oh my gosh, I love this. Keep going.
He's been understanding their stories, and he's been trying. What Jesus' purpose is to help us resolve our stories into the story of Christ, right? To draw our stories into the story of Jesus, and that means that the particularity of our stories isn't something dangerous and scary. The particularity of our stories and our history, including the history that precedes our birth, right?
Yeah.
The story that I'm born into that shapes us, becomes, I think of it as like a beautiful thing to discover. And a thing to steward.
Hmm.
I think of actually stewarding my story,
That's beautiful.
because I have agency in how my story plays out. And I can think about myself as Asian American. I kind of live in a certain way that's just mainly about like only pro Asian American rights, and a certain way that pits my identity against others. Or I can try to find a complex way as a follower of Jesus. How do I steward my Asian American story in a way that invites others into a broader understanding of culture, that stands with others who are suffering and oppressed, um, and that recognizes and acknowledges the privileges, the gifts that I've been given in history. I've just been thinking about Civil Rights Act, and how that opened up space. That was accomplished by MLK, Black American Civil Rights Movement, but that opened up space for us as Asian Americans to have equal rights.
Yeah.
So it wasn't something we advocated for, but we got it. And then even just things like this 1964 Immigration Act, how that shapes a lot of, actually in that time. Previously, there was like Chinese Exclusion Act. There was a lot of things that prevented Asians from coming to the United States because they didn't want us here, right?
Wow.
And then when it was opened back up, Lyndon Johnson, in the civil rights era, but it was open specifically targeting professionals, right? And that, when you think about socioeconomically, the higher echelon, people that are coming with the kind of jobs that, you just think of like white collar, right? And
Sure.
That inevitably shapes the perception of especially East Asians that came in, because you're getting the people that are highly educated, the ones that are going to make more money, the ones that, and you add on all these cultural factors for why we're not caught in the some of the racial complexities, black and white,
Sure.
and we just, and then kind of the language barrier. So sometimes just kind of skating underneath the radar, but meanwhile doing well socioeconomically. And so what happens is that created, I think, this perception of this, that what's been labeled the mono minority myth, and used that idea of taking East Asians and saying they're the minority to follow because they're doing so well economically and socioeconomically, and how that can be harmful for everybody, really, right? Anything that's not the truth ends up harming everybody, and it also, of course, is used to sort of unfairly criticize especially Black people. Like, why haven't you risen up the way Asian Americans have, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of, understanding this history and understanding these stories, and not being afraid of the fact that it's going to take time to learn these things, and learning our own stories, I find it as, instead of anxiety inducing, as a beautiful, like, legacy of what it means to follow Jesus. Like, okay, think about when some people first become a Christian, right? They become a follower of Jesus, they have a powerful experience, and then they've got this whole Bible, and they're like, what the heck is this?
Right.
And I'm like, what? You're reading about this guy, Abraham guy, and how does that have to do with me? And really, in a real way, what we're reading is this strange legacy of faith, this family history. It may not be our ethnic history, but it's a family history of faith. And we receive it as our own, and we come to like we do all these sermons every Sunday, and we're like trying to learn about the people, and we don't find it anxious and anxiety inducing. And I think that if we look at the idea of trying to understand the complex racial identities, and in these times, of course, post George Floyd, really a lot of African American brothers and sisters would say they've been saying these things for a long time. Like, most people are aware now that it is something that it's just on our radar, right?
Right.
Thinking about race not as just the color of one's skin, these constructs that we've created, but as something to understand why they've come to exist, these ways that we understand each other and these identities, and to understand and be reflective of how they shape how the way we relate to each other, and whether the way that we relate to each other is a way that honors each other's story and gives space for each other to dignify our full self as individuals and as members of broader collectives. Like that becomes something it's exciting to me, and
Right.
I don't even like, I don't think it's important to think of it as like, I have to master this idea of like, understanding this racial group, right? I think of it as like, look, we're going to be learning about each other forever,
Mm.
and so why don't we just start enjoying the process now? And I love the fact that we can just be ignorant. I can be like, for example, I'm trying to better understand my fellow Asian American, like especially non-East Asian, Southeast Asian, Cambodian, Vietnamese, like just the differences of their stories. And, they oftentimes come from more sort of refugee kind of situations. And like, how do you experience being American? How do you experience living in this country? And I don't know. I guess I just see it as exciting. I see it as something to embrace, and maybe sometimes we Christians want to start from the position, I want to get it right. We're fixated, I want to get it right.
Yeah.
I look at it again, the whole narrative and Jesus walking with people thing. I think Jesus prioritizes us living and learning out of relationship with him. But I don't think there's a end destination point that I need to get to in understanding other people groups and how they look at themselves. And so I don't know if that helps.
And yeah, that's great. I've said that. I've said I want to get it right. Yeah, I've said that because I am a white male, and I want to get it right because I want to, and I think that comes from a place of it's probably the Western culture. It's probably the fact that I'm an American, whatever. And I'm like, I just want to get it right. And so it's a sense of accomplishment of I've arrived to that space. And it comes from a place of, I want to not be ignorant, and I want to be aware, and I want to pull a seat up to your table if you allow me to sit at your table and just be present and learn and go, what have I done wrong so that I don't do that anymore? How can I not do those things anymore? And as I start to think about it, I think about, that's interwoven into our faith journeys too. When we say we want to get it right, it's the same sort of thing of, I just want to be the right type of Christian, and I want to get that right, because we've learned like it's a narrow road, and if you go wrong, you go this way, and if you go right, you go you stay on the path. So that's my thought on that. Go ahead.
I think this is so powerful, Jeremy, and I feel like it has the potential to completely change people's approach to these conversations, because as I'm listening to you talk, it feels it's not academic, it's incarnational. And if we begin to approach stewarding our stories, because like our story is part of the greater narrative of the gospel, and also my story is part of the greater narrative of the kingdom of God, which is diverse and vast. You can't learn about that only through books, or through Google. Like I have to learn your story by sitting with you, and experiencing the incarnational ministry of presence that Jesus modeled for us. And so I don't know, I have never thought about it that way before, that just like coming to faith and the adventure of learning the story that I've been adopted into, in the same way this could be an adventure of learning the story of the kingdom that I have been made a citizen of.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me, those who had the most curiosity, I think that's the difference, right, boss? You did a good job talking about like, we want to get it right, but but maybe a posture of curiosity is always better for learning, right?
Right.
Versus a posture of like, what if I want to get 100% on this test, you know,
Mhm.
and not
Yeah,
learn.
yeah.
But those who I noticed, there would be people that going back to that church experience that would come to the Chinese church, and they were white, and maybe they adopted someone who's a Chinese kids from China, where they really were interested in China, or they had a mission heart, missional heart, that wanted to see Jesus in China, so they would like see going to that Chinese church in Lancaster as a bridge, those who had that curiosity, I tended to see that intercultural heart in them tended to also correlate with something about their spirituality oftentimes was more just, I don't know, I mean, being a more, maybe, can I say it, more mature follower of Jesus,
Sure.
more,
Yeah.
And I guess that is a trend, right? I mean, like when you follow Christ and the Spirit of God matures us, we tend to be interested in other people, and maybe being open to like being vulnerable about like I can enter into spaces and be a guest. You mentioned that boss wanting to be able to sit at the table. I can be a guest, and I don't have to. Sometimes if we think of the picture of witnessing for Jesus as like, I'm the one who knows it all and I'm just telling everybody everything about Jesus,
Yeah.
that may not make it that may not help us to see that Jesus himself was a guest, and he's bearing witness to the reality of God's presence by being a guest in Pharisees' homes, in tax collectors' homes,
I had the same thing, Maggie. I was like,
what does it look like to learn how to be a guest? And this is something that, interrogate yourself, right? Like, okay, so you go to a Chinatown, right? And then you start to notice, say, a Chinatown, this restaurant is oh wow, it's all white people in this restaurant. And then you see, I wonder how the Asians feel about this restaurant. Maybe this restaurant has become the Yelp restaurant that all the people that want to learn about culture go to, like it's just kind of a destination spot now, but maybe I bet the prices have gone, like, and you start to think about like, what does it look like to be a guest in another culture in a way that we all know what it's like when a guest comes into your space and they take over. They're not really a guest, right? It's the same thing when it comes like the idea of being a missionary in a country, but you're sort of not really a good learner.
Yeah, right.
Or we know this from youth, right? When you're trying to understand youth culture, but you're not, I love the idea of like meet youth on their terms, earn the right to be heard by youth, right? So that they really resonate with what you're saying, right? When it comes to talking about Jesus. We know what it feels like when you're not earning the right to be heard. And I just think about same thing when it comes to culturally. That's my suggestion. I think, on the receiving end as an Asian American, I think about when non-Asians want to learn the complexities of it. I just think like, first of all, everybody knows that you don't know enough. Don't know a lot. So just admit it. Be curious. Don't be scared of admitting ignorance, because it's like nobody's got illusions. But but on the receiving end, when someone's curious and when someone has that posture, how refreshing it is, how deeply refreshing it is, right? To see that, because then I can teach without feeling like I'll have to like show you I need to teach you.
Sure.
I can teach without being like a very like, I can just be like, oh yeah, this is how we think about this, or like this dish, this food. Yeah, I think this difference. I mean, like, when it comes to like the Asian American experience, because of first generation, second generation, I can start to explain some of that, and that curiosity opens up space to be like, wow, I just know this because I swim in it like water. But when people have that curiosity towards my culture and I can explain it to others, it actually helps me to learn because I'm articulating something that I've never had to say out loud before.
Yeah.
Someone else, when they show me that they don't understand how that works. And that's the curious thing about us exchanging cultures, right? We start to learn about ourselves deeper as we show that curiosity. And allow for each other's difference to be something that we don't understand yet, but we appreciate, and in a way that even can admit, like, okay, so if you're afraid of getting it wrong, right? Maybe you're like, man, am I exoticizing this person right now?
Huh.
I think of it as like being okay to be like, I could be exoticizing you. I don't know. And I don't want to make you uncomfortable if that is. But to be honest, it is exotic to me, right? That food smells really different, and my body's not used to that kind of smell. And
Yep.
How does that smell to you? Does that feel like comfort food? Yeah, and like, that has happened to me so much, right? Where non-Asians will come to a space, and this is something that we're just like love, like pork buns or something like that.
Sure.
And then someone's like, oh, that's so pungent, it stinks, and I'm like, oh, wow, that's crazy that they think it stinks. It's just like mind-blowing for me. It's like, you're missing out on how amazing this is. And and so that experience becomes a moment to open things up to, oh, okay, you can hold that same experience where, oh, that stinks, in a way that's like, this is disgusting, get away, like your culture sucks. And you can hold it in a way that's like, yeah, to be honest, like right now, it's probably because of the way my body, like the way I've raised the food I'm used to, this smell is like not, it stinks to me, but that's probably me, and I want to get to a point where I can enjoy this kind of food, like that's a super different posture.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
I think something, as you started to, you talk about even food smells, of like, there is a story before that moment for yourself, for all of us, when we have like, this is our comfort food. And one thing I thought of was back in high school, as we were doing mission trip prep, our youth pastor stood in front of us and said, I mean, he was like, I need to get this inside of your head before we leave this zip code, before we get on the plane to go anywhere. It's not weird. It's different. It's not weird. It's different. And he just, I mean, it was like multiple times in prep of always drilling that in. And I've carried that because I've been like, it's not weird. It's different. Because weird is negative, is that's not right. And it's like, well, who says this is right? Who says this? Why do you get to determine that? That's the stuff I've thought through. And I've carried that into spaces when I've had students and I've been like, hey, it's not weird. It's different. Because we need to lean into it and go, it's different. That's a different way to approach it. And I love that you said that about even just food smells, to then be able to lean in to say, tell me about this. This is an interesting smell to me. It's different to me. Can you tell me about it? And why does it matter to you? Why does this dish matter so much to you?
Help me learn to appreciate it. And I'll be even me, right? There's this dish called stinky tofu.
Okay.
I mean, first of all, tofu is already seen as like, whoa, what is that? Because American food doesn't know how to do tofu. It's just like the bland white stuff that you throw on salads,
Sure.
That only
I don't know how to do tofu. I'm just like, that's not me. I'm not into that.
But if you
I've not been brought into it. Go ahead.
It's amazing, right? If you understand how like tofu gets incorporated in all these dishes, Koreans have a really interesting take. But there's this interesting dish. I mean, this is way on the far edge, right? If you go into like the night markets, street markets of Taiwan, there's this dish called stinky tofu, and it's fermented tofu, and it literally stinks, right? It literally stinks like rotten, but it's pungent, right? But people view it as like, man, it's like delicious, I'm still getting to a point of trying to get myself to like really enjoy it. I've tried it a couple times. I can be like, it's something probably on the level of like the super sour pickles right now, sour that I don't love, like dill pickles. I don't love super sour, but I can eat it. And I can be like, I could see how certain people would like have a jar of pickles and just want to eat it. That's not me. But there's something about taking the uniquely pungent, let's say it that way, experiences or things that are at the heart, that at the same time are very off-putting, disgusting, even different, weird, and leaning into that and trusting that on the other side, when you've come to better understand that, you will find that you were the weird one. You were the one that was missing out. You're the one that, as a smaller person, because you cannot emphasizing yet, understand the beauty of certain cultural expressions, experiences, ways of eating, hanging out, listening to music, just all of it, right? I mean, and I think this default posture of like, not normal, weird, and thinking my gut instinct is not to say wrong, bad, but to say, God, help me to get outside of myself and to see beauty there. And just, if that is our gut instinct, know that, God, where are you there? Right.
That's a great question.
That is, and that's a great line to say, God, where are you there? To like, that's the, as I hear that, it's going, God's already there. Me, I don't need to bring God there. God's there already. I just need to show up and go, oh, cool. I think about all of this is in a posture at times, like, it's just this, like, people that look like me have established this get on my level. This is the level everyone else needs to achieve. It's a superiority to, we're number one only and everything else is less than. And it bothers me. It bothers me because I go, no. We as Christians, we're supposed to dismantle all of that and come in and go, teach me. Like you said, Jesus was a guest in everyone's home. He went to Zacchaeus and said, I'm going to your house.
Yeah. And what white supremacy and all that kind of stuff does, right? Sadly, it actually, I think, disables those who hold it, right? Because we watched it. I mean, I'm sure if you've seen that kind of ideology or that way of viewing yourself in relation to other people, it's sad. You're watching people kind of become shell versions of themselves.
Yeah.
And you're holding onto an illusion, right? And and of course, then we see how it harms our witness for Jesus, and it's infected the American church, and it creates these weird politically charged like just turns people off from Christ, right? But I really, if you can look at that and just, I actually look at it, and I mean, not in I don't think in a condescending way, but it's just like Jesus when he's looking at the wealthy man who couldn't accept what Jesus was saying in terms of like, sell all you have and give to the poor. Jesus is trying to heal him of his addiction to wealth, right? And your addiction to seeing yourself, having to see yourself. Even just the idea of that we need to have a superior, like a ranking of who's better and worse.
Right. Just
that, and you have to put yourself at the top. And the way that when you're there, you can't learn anything because I've already learned it all. Yeah. And all those other cultures are worse or something like that. And it just becomes so sad how you are putting yourself, it's like you're confining yourself to the corner in timeout. And, and the white supremacy is like, I'm in this little corner of people that think we are better. And everybody else is like, man, I just wish you could learn how to play with the rest of us and like enjoy each other. But you're stuck. You're really stuck. And you think that Jesus is with you because you claim the name of Jesus.
It's like that. The cool kids club, cool kids table, the one table that's been established in the lunchroom, and you go, here's everyone else. Like there's like 8 people there. That's it. And chances are they're probably going to hold on to that for the rest of their life. Like I was a part of the cool kids when I was in high school, and you're like, cool, man. That doesn't matter. It literally doesn't. That's a shell of yourself that you're holding on to. Okay, Jeremy. So, okay, I could sit and keep talking.
Yeah,
And
John, your mind is being blown right now.
so much, and
Well,
I appreciate it so much.
Can I make a sort of a suggestion remark for?
Yes.
I mean, I'm thinking about someone might be in this place where it's like, okay, maybe I'm not a white supremacist, but maybe it's just I'm still intimidated and I don't know where to start and to better understand cultures. And maybe you're thinking about youth, you're a youth worker, and you're thinking about that kid, you know, and maybe there's not a lot of minorities around you, but there's that one kid, and you just want to better understand them. And I just think about like, you probably already know. You probably already know what to do on a certain level, right? You know, you have the Holy Spirit, and so go and listen and learn and be sensitive to and try to imagine where they're coming from, right? Doesn't necessarily mean throw like I read all this Asian American stuff to that Chinese kid, and now it's like, okay, I learned all about your identity, because probably if you think about it, that kid might, if they're in a minority in a context, they might want to assimilate, you know, might want to, and maybe it's not your place to be like, okay, no, don't. I read about this. You're not supposed to assimilate. You're supposed to be proud of your culture and all these things. But, you know, you walk with people in their lives, and then over time, their story unfolds, you know? So maybe right now they want to assimilate, but you could also be like, oh, you know, I'd love to, you know, maybe you encourage that and you bring it out of them by being like, hey, you know, I noticed that you do that. I'd love to, you know, I'm a white guy. I don't know anything about Chinese food. I'd love you to show me sometime. And they show you, bring them to, and that actually instills a sense of pride in them. Is like, wow, okay, I don't have to completely assimilate, and I don't have to completely take off this part of my identity. And so I think there's steps that's just common sense, right? In the process of like, I think youth workers tend to pride themselves in understanding youth and like being close to understanding the heartbeat of where they're at. You translate that skill into just adding some level of cultural competency onto it, and just entering into youth's lives and thinking about, you know, whether it's Asian American, African American, and thinking about the coming alongside thing, right? When it comes to power dynamics, recognizing, hey, how do I come alongside, and just recognizing my age, all those things matter when it comes to shaping that. You know, I think that sometimes we just need to say, just give a little push. You got it. You got it. The Holy Spirit can help you. And yes, there's resources, you know, books. I definitely believe in the idea of, again, going out and being guests. You know, you have a white youth group, find the nearest Black church, nearest Chinese church, nearest whatever, and get to know that youth worker and say, hey, what would it look like for us to kind of show up at a worship night that you guys host? You know, and we're just kind of, I know it's gonna be super awkward. Can we just show up and we just kind of like, we're probably gonna mess it up, and I'm probably gonna have to tell my youth the same thing, not weird, different, you know, and tell me about things that I need to do when we're there. But man, everybody wants to strategize, but I think just, you probably already know the next step. Just take that next step. And those who do take those next steps in pushing further with intercultural stuff, I think they become the trailblazers for others. I think that others end up wanting to be like, teach us, how did you do that? Like we noticed you guys did that service project with another group together, like teach us about that. And you're just like, well, it wasn't that hard. We just started that relationship, you know? And we messed up a lot of things along the way, but we just got going. So
okay, so another question, because you asked a question to yourself and answered it, which was great. Many times I've heard this. Yeah, but why does this matter to youth ministry? Can we just stick to youth ministry? And that's why we're having this conversation and other conversations, is because it does matter to youth ministry.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
if I'm a youth worker,
yeah,
put myself in a seat where I go, man, we have a bunch of white kids, you know, and why would it matter to me? Why should it matter to me?
I totally resonate with that. I totally get why that question is seems to make a lot of sense. You could approach it in so many angles. I'll start this way. your youth are going to become young adults.
Mhm.
And if you look at the statistics, the rise of the nuns, the percentage of people that don't go to church anymore, the Generation Z, millennials, social media, all that, you really believe that doing fun experiences, the laser tag night, I tell you, we could do all the best youth stuff.
Right.
You could have the cool whatever, and they're still gonna hit that young adult stage, and then maybe they go to college, maybe they don't, but they'll become disillusioned. They have to ask those questions, and if you think of youth not as adults in the making,
Hmm.
and adults want to ask those questions, then even on just the question of like, are they going to stay in the faith? I just think that it's very unlikely. If you haven't resolved thinking about culture,
Yeah.
and shown within the boundaries of the church, right? I mean, this is what we think about with youth in general, right? Let them have doubts. Let them ask questions. Let them treat them serious. Don't just treat them as like people that don't want to ask those questions.
Yep.
So culture, huge, right? In that, and then another thing I would say is that question is the question you would only ask, like you were saying, if it's an only white youth group,
Right.
and let me say it this way: if you don't address the things that may be uncomfortable to you, and you think we don't have culture here or whatever, right?
Right.
The people fill in the gaps anyways. It's just kind of like you avoid talking about anything,
Yep.
sex. You avoid talking about, sexuality, any of the most hot button things, right?
Mhm.
They will fill it in anyways, and they're grasping for something, and so they may grasp for something that maybe their family is more politically oriented, and it may be some sort of like very strongly leaning,
Yep.
very far left, far right,
Right.
and it doesn't incorporate Jesus. And
Mhm.
the way I look at it is the best way isn't necessarily to say this is the exact way, but to have the conversation, open up the space, have Jesus involved, and open up the space to be like, these ongoing conversations we welcome, and model for maybe your kids. Maybe your kids are the ones asking. Maybe it's not the youth worker that's like, why talk about race culture? Maybe it's the kids. But modeling for the kids that are anxious and don't, why do you reject that stuff? Because you're anxious, right? You're anxious. You don't know how to. It's just like a foreign territory. You don't know how to. You don't know how to enter into it. But if you initiate them into it, and you show, and you as a leader, this is part of being leadership, right?
Right.
Is help people lower the anxiety in exploring territory, right? If you help them explore it without that anxiety, and model what it looks like to be a white guy that's like, we're white, I'm a white guy, I'm figuring this out. Let me tell you some of the things I've thought about and I've learned about what it looks like for me as a white guy. And I didn't even realize until a couple years ago this interesting history of like me being Irish or whatever, right? Things like that, right?
Yeah.
And helping people come to better understand themselves and their relation to other people, and not make that into anxiety-inducing process. That that ends up being something that I think they'll thank you for, right? Because again, following Jesus is not just about this guy, that gets you into heaven when you die, but a guy that helps, the God of the universe in human flesh, that helps you to understand your story, right? And these white kids from wherever suburb, like they're more than I'm a white kid from the suburb.
Yep.
Right? That is such a sad way to put you in a box. They want to know, who am I? What is my story? And what story is God calling me into? That may be a part of who I am, a white kid from a suburb of like whatever privileged area, and but I want to learn how to take that and turn it into a story filled with Jesus and the upside down kingdom of Christ. And if I'm not given an opportunity to be mentored into that, yeah, I mean, the worst case scenario can actually be pretty dangerous, right?
Right.
And but the best case scenario, man, you can have kids that what would it look like for these kids to have a more complex understanding of their identity and even search out connection with other cultures, even as youth? Like that's powerful, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge.
That's super good. Okay. Unfortunately, we have to kind of start to cut this off because, and it feels like that because it's like, okay, we gotta stop.
Yeah.
For recording sake and all that sort of thing. But Jeremy, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Maggie,
this
thank you
is
so much. This is great.
this is powerful, and yeah, just to reiterate everything that Boss was just saying, um, there's so much wisdom in everything you've said, and I'm so grateful. I mean, other people are going to listen and glean from it, but selfishly, I'm really glad that I was here for this conversation.
Yeah, I'm just glad. If anything, I was like, I see this as a conversation between the three of us, and we are just happen to recording it. So that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Jeremy, as we wrap up, is there how can people connect with you? Maybe they heard something along the way and they're like, I got to talk to that guy and I want to connect with him. You probably know, people probably know you if they're in North Philly, but people listening elsewhere, how can they connect?
Yeah, I guess I'm pretty open on the social media. I guess Jeremy Chen on Facebook. I think it's facebook.com/jeremy.chen. I think they have that.
We'll grab it and put that in the.
I don't know. I mean, do people use Twitter? It's Jeremy Germs, like
awesome.
That's my nickname, Jeremy224 on Twitter. It's my birthday. You know how your middle school AIM screen name. My email, jeremytchen@gmail.
Awesome.
But yeah, I love talking about this kind of stuff. And yeah, may the Lord bless you guys on your journey, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Jeremy. This is great.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yo, I can only speak for myself, and even Maggie. Wow, so much from that conversation that I am thinking through. Jeremy has just dropped so many rich statements that have got my mind spinning. It is changing and altering the way that I'm viewing our topic and the things we discussed. I mean, even just talking about Jesus and talking about how he was a guest everywhere he went and the posture that he presented himself in, even when he didn't have to, all for the sake of the ministry that he was displaying and showing us and showing us how to present ourselves to others. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts that are scrambled and not necessarily fully coherent, but I'm probably going to re-listen to this, even though I sat in the conversation. Yeah, super excited from that. So Jeremy, again, thank you so much for sitting with us and dropping those truth bombs and rattling my brain for this conversation. I hope that your brain has been somewhat shifted and some of the things that you thought before now have been altered, and some things that you're seeing are shifting a little bit. That's our hope. That's our prayer. And my ultimately our goal and our prayer in all of this has been that you are now seeing why this matters, and how it matters in youth ministry, and how this makes not only how we serve specifically AAPI students and families, but in a broader sense, all of our students, how it serves all of them, every single one of our students, no matter their background. Because our goal, our hope as youth leaders is that they move on and they go into bigger and better things, and they leave this space from the ministries that we have, and their eyes are opened to the rest of the world and the rest of God's images that he's placed all over creation. I'm excited about the conversations that are going to come from this. I'm excited about the conversation that you're having right now with the Holy Spirit, and that you'll have with Jesus and with God. And I look forward to having more conversations. What's really cool is that there are people that are sitting in your city, in your town, close by even, who are wanting to have these conversations with you and who want to sit with you in this. And we have ways for you to find them. Jump on our website, NNYM.org, and search your area to find youth leaders who are also looking for someone like you to have conversations with. This has been an incredible conversation. I'm looking forward to many more. I want to have them with you as well. Our whole team does. So reach out to us. Find us on Instagram. Find us on Twitter, on Facebook, all those different social channels. If you got something to say, reach out to us. Maybe there's something you want to talk to Jeremy about. Find all of his stuff in the show notes in the links below. And make sure to subscribe and like and send us a review as well. It helps us be seen. All of those things that you've heard before as you've listened to podcasts. It just helps us grow this community. That's all it's for. Until next time, make sure to continue to pour into yourself, because the more you pour into yourself, the more you're going to be able to pour out to others. Until next time, blessings. Peace.